What's up everyone, I'm Twisted and today we'll be taking a look at the last act of the second season of Arcane. I'll be going over everything that happens, explain a couple things, mention a couple Easter eggs, but also try to explain what this means for League's lore and share my overall opinion of the show. I left some timestamps in case you want to jump to a specific point, but before you do, I just want to say that if you enjoy this type of videos, consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm planning on making a couple more videos about Arcane and League's lore, so stay tuned for that. Episode 7 starts like all other episodes by showing us the disc with the words a Netflix series, but this time the disc features Echo and Powder, since this episode is going to take place in another universe. We then see Benzu's shop from this universe and this other Echo. In his journal we can see a device that already looks pretty similar to the Z drive we are used to. We then see the two Echoes merging together. This isn't the case of the Echoes switching places. This is the conscious of our Echo being displaced into this other Echo's body. Echo looks at his own reflection in the same clock he was fixing in season 1. Then Powder from this universe appears and obviously Echo is still processing everything. The Powder he knew is far from this one, so his instinct was to protect himself. On the reflection we actually see our Jinxed. Notice the makeup and the whiter skin. Here we see Powder wearing Vi's necklace, first hint that Vi isn't alive in this universe. Benzu shows up and of course Echo hugs him. It's been a decade since he last saw his Benzu. We then transition into the last drop, where we see that Vander's still alive in this universe. Behind Echo we can see some doodles featuring Milo, Powder, Echo, Clagger as well as Benzu, Vander and Silco. Powder mentions the Innovators competition. The device she and Echo were working on was for this competition. We then see Clagger and Milo, all grown up. One of those things that we all wanted to see, but I don't think anyone expected to actually happen. Clagger calls Echo Little Man, his nickname from season 1. Here, Clagger mentions how his and Milo's project revolve around creating plants that would feed off the Fisher's gases. And here we see this universe's version of one of the Jinxers, the one that dies in the last episode. Milo runs off after her and Clagger tells Jinx to help him out. It's cool to see that in this universe, all of them grew up to be such close friends. Then Clagger says, "Where would you be without her?" A line that's here for us, the viewers, because we know the answer. This line also causes Echo's mind to glitch out because he also knows. Through all of this, Echo is also scribbling the anomaly. Powder helps Milo out with the girl. After he leaves, Vander approaches Powder, asking her where the kids would be without her. He gives her a pep talk on how she isn't living up to her potential, and later we'll see that she isn't because of what happened with Vi. She's scared. Then, as Echo is having a breakdown, Heimerdinger shows up. The camera transitions to him as if it's an actual camera on the table that just fell. As Echo gets up to go throw up outside, Heimerdinger notices the anomaly he drew. Heimer reveals that he too is the Heimer from our universe. However, he has been in this universe for longer than Echo. As he says, 1128 days, 6 hours and 20 minutes, which is about 3 years, and in case you're wondering, note this isn't the time it took from season 2 to be released after the ending of season 1, or between both final acts, but it's close. And as Heimer confirms, he has been waiting for Echo, though he wasn't sure if he would ever show up. Echo asks about Jayce, and Heimer says that he might have ended up somewhere else, as the anomaly behaved differently around him. As we'll see, this might be because Viktor intervened, which makes me wonder if Viktor also pulled Heimer and Echo to this one, so that together they could build a Z-Drive which would later be used to stop Viktor. Heimer reveals that X-Tech was never invented in this universe. As we'll see, this is likely because the kids never ran away from Jayce's workshop, which caused Jayce to likely never meet Viktor, and or the death of a kid was probably enough to get him exiled from the academy. Maybe he even killed himself like he was going to, and well, Viktor is probably really sick right now, or worse. But without X-Tech there's no X-Gates, and without the gates there's no anomaly. Heimerdinger tries to convince Echo of how wonderful this new universe is. Echo obviously knows that there are people that need him in his own universe, and is determined to find a way back. And I really like his response here. This is so in character for him. He could have left everything behind and stayed in this perfect world, but he knows that ain't right. If the writers got the character right, it was definitely Echo. Powder shows up and asks if Echo wants to see Vi with her. We then transition to Jayce as he wakes up in a universe ravaged by Viktor and the anomaly. Like Echo, he feels nauseous and throws up. His hammer stops working, likely because of the anomaly. He then sees who he believes is the mage from season 1, whose identity is going to be revealed to actually be Viktor in the last episode. If you're curious about all of that time loop stuff, I will explain that later into the video once we get to this reveal. He leads Jayce to the horrors caused by the anomaly. I especially love this frame of Jayce behind the head of this person. This is partly his fault after all, and we can feel the guilt and fear in his eyes. Then we get a good look at Piltover and Zahn in this universe. Notice the bridge there. the Council, and of course the X-Gates. As I will explain later, this universe is likely the future of our main universe, one where Viktor won. Then we transition to Jinx's hideout. As we can see, she also found this place and made it her own in this universe. But one interesting difference is that this version actually has rails so that people don't fall off. We see it full of paintings. We've seen how artistic young Powder and Jinx are, but here we see how that side of her would have developed without the traumas and Silco. We can see paintings of herself, and I believe this is Claggor. Powder tells Echo how his invention for the competition was supposed to be an energy storage device and how he asked her to help him. This subtly also lets us know that Powder herself isn't competing, she's just helping Echo. Likely because, again, she doesn't believe in herself because of what happened to Vi. Behind her, we see her desk with a lot of references, including her monkey, the bunny ears from Pow Pow, and a drawing of her and Echo with a heart. In the desk we also see plans for what the duo will later build alongside Heimerdinger, so the energy storage device that the other Echo had planned was likely used to power the Z-Drive. Echo mentioned something called Zero Loss Chemical Energy Cell, again another hint toward the Z-Drive. He also picks up a gear similar to the one from Viktor, and we can also see a doodle of Claggor, similar to the ones from our universe, and a Love You card, likely from Echo to Powder. Oh, and there are these drawings of the lovebirds where Echo seems to have a mohawk. If so, that's a clear reference to his OG look. Then we see this shrine Powder made for her sister. It's in the same location she used to play with Isha in the other universe. We can see Vi's boxing gloves. This is a clear parallel to how Jinx dealt with her trauma in our universe. There she had toys in the shape of Milo and Claggor. In this universe, both of them, as well as Benzo and Vander, survived, not to mention she stayed close with Echo, so she had the emotional support to not let her traumas dictate so much of her life, though as I said, this power has traumas of her own. It's like what Vi told Caitlyn, the hole is always there, it just gets smaller. Echo says it was a mistake to go there, Powder understands it as him saying that it was a mistake for him to come to her hideout, but he's likely talking about coming to that universe. Echo asks Powder if Vi died because of her. It's here that we learn that Vi was the one that died because she didn't survive the explosion in Jayce's lab, Echo being the one who gave them the tip for it. It's very likely that in this universe, they both blame themselves for her death. The mention of the job makes Echo realize it was the reason for X-Tech to not exist here. Powder tells Echo to leave and he says he's working on it, obviously hinting at him leaving this universe. Before he leaves, we can see another of those cups and Powder's notebook full of drawings of herself and Echo. As Echo walks around Piltover, we see a circle bike pass by, same type of bike he rides with Powder in the Enemy music video. We then see a reference to Poro Snacks and to multiple esports teams. A lot of background characters from our universe make a cameo here, including the bartender. Echo looks at the floor on the bridge and remembers the last time he saw his own Powder, which was during their fight in episode 7 of season 1. Remember that in that fight, Echo hesitated to kill Jinx, and she tried to blow herself up alongside him. We see the guy that was speaking up on Huck in act 1 of season 1. We see Jericho, as well as the guy who was working in the airship that Jinx burned down, and the guard from the academy. Then this song starts playing, which is being sung by Heimerdinger, and the song is about his arc and how Echo opened his eyes to what technology can do for people. In it we get the word hourglass, an obvious reference to Echo and his Z-Drive, but as the song plays, we get a montage of Echo and Jayce. Echo goes to Jayce's lab from that universe. We can see how the balcony was repaired. We see the chalkboard still exactly like in season 1. We see some flashbacks of when Vi died. We see her laying with Powder, crying beside her. Milo scared. Marcus arrived and we can see it in his face. He wasn't expecting a dead child. And based on what we know from this timeline, he obviously didn't send the other kids to Stillwater. We see Claggor's hand shaking as Powder holds Vi. Meanwhile, Echo is extracting all the pieces of the crystals he can find from the lab. We see those same crystals in Powder's hand, confirming it was indeed because of her that Vi died. Then we see him in the place where the Firelight's hideout is in our universe. Over in another universe, Jayce slowly walks across the deserted cities. We see ships. We see this shot based on the one from season 1, when Vi and her gang return to the Undercity. Then this shot is similar to one from the last episode of season 2. The song ends with a familiar shot of the last drop. The kid in the center will show up later in another universe, alongside her family, while this one in the right looks like one of the Firelights. And we transition from people applauding Heimerdinger to what's left of people in another universe. Here and in other shots, we can see the flowers that were growing in Viktor's commune. It's here that Jayce finds Viktor's automatons. Jayce runs away from them, assuming they are dangerous, but as we'll see, they don't attack him once, which makes sense since old Viktor is the one controlling them. Jayce then trips and falls and his own hammer hits him in the leg. We can see hand-drawn frames of his bones. He then falls onto a fish fissure and passes out. We return to the last drop, where Echo tells Heimer he plans to recreate the anomaly using the crystals he found. Echo asks for his help, and Heimer says, "How could I forsake a brilliant lad in need?" Again, as we transition to the brilliant lad he forsaked, Jayce. Jayce wakes up and realizes his leg is fucked. Then we get a montage of him trying to survive in the fissure. In one of the shots we see Viktor. Why he didn't help Jayce? I'm not sure, maybe this was a test. We see his hammer succumbing to the anomaly's corruption, likely because of the gem inside it. We see him eating some animals that look like Rio. The automatons are spying on him, he notices them and probably figures out that they are not dangerous. Meanwhile, a lot of voice lines from past episodes can be heard, which shows us how guilty he feels about what he did, from making X-Tech to betraying Heimerdinger, to merging Viktor with the X-Corp. Drinking the water and eating the animals is causing him to puke, and treating his wound has caused it to become corrupted. We get a better look at the animals here. It's possible that these animals are very good at surviving in harsh conditions, which would explain why Singed used them for his experiments. Then we see the faces of Mel and Viktor, with eyes fully black, again alluding to his guilt. It was thanks to these two people that he managed to create X-Tech. Then we see him making the same exact drawings as Echo did in his notebook. And we get a couple frames of what's to come in between all of this. As this automaton Jayce moves its eye, we transition to our Jayce's eye, and we see that some time has passed. He has a beard now, he used his hammer to fix his leg, and he's now trying to escape from the fissure. I think giving him a leg injury is really interesting, because Viktor also had one. And at the end, Jayce is going to tell Viktor that his imperfections are not a weakness. And here we see Jayce overcoming his challenges in spite of his conditions, just like Viktor did all of his life. Also, as I said in my last video, this is very reminiscent of OG Viktor. And so, Jayce manages to crawl out of the fissure. Meanwhile, Echo leads Powder to the tree hideout, where he painted a mural of Vi in the place where the Firelight's mural was in his universe. Echo tells Powder how he had a dream about things going differently. Obviously, he's talking about his own universe. And he mentions how Powder was always meant to be someone with ideas that changed the world. He's saying this because, as we've seen, this is a Powder that's holding back her potential. Potential is also something Vi will mention later when freeing Jinxed from prison. And after that, Echo is going to convince her to also use her skills for good and help the cities, finally fulfilling her potential for good. Powder says she's afraid of losing herself chasing a dream, and Echo says sometimes taking a leap forward means leaving a few things behind, which is a phrase that applies to most characters from the show. In season 1, all of them were stuck in the past, from Jayce being blinded by his dream of magic, Vi and Jinx stuck in the night of the explosion, and even Echo, which was living more in the present, still asked himself if things would have gone differently if he had been there to help that night. This phrase could also apply to what Echo is going to do, which is leave this universe behind, but in general here Echo is saying that to move forward you have to let go. Here is also when Echo asks Powder for help. We go back to Jayce traversing through Piltover, passing by the automatons because he knows they are harmless. Echo shows the crystals to Powder. Instead of the usual visuals of Jinx's traumas, this version is much calmer, again showing that this is a Powder that was able to grow up with emotional support and stability from her family and friends. Echo lights some incense on the Vi shrine, making up for the rude conversation earlier, and so the two of them alongside Heimerdinger start working together. We see a lot of shots of them working in parallel. We see this shot reminiscent of the one from the arcades. Then we see tools floating, similarly to when Jayce and Viktor figured out X-Tech, except here we can see the anomaly pattern. Then we see Powder going through Echo's notes and seeing the anomaly as well as two people from different universes. Her reaction here being a hint that Echo wasn't fully honest with her, and she's slowly figuring out that this isn't her Echo. We can also see Jayce's gem in the corner. We can see Echo working on the little monkeys we'll later see inside the Z-Drive. I think Powder's reaction here might hint that she's putting one and one together, again realizing that this isn't her Echo. Then we see a small montage of them trying their invention until they finally manage to create a very small anomaly. Echo pulls the cord, activating the machine, causing Heimer's wrench to flicker out of his hand. Powder asks what it does. Echo pulls the cord again, causing the wrench to once again fall. He pulls it 2 more times, figuring out that it creates a time loop. Heimer asks him how he did that, and he mentions inversions on Jayce's acceleration rune as he circles Jayce's rune on the board. The acceleration rune part might be a reference to Jayce's acceleration gate from League, or, just a reference to how X-Tech accelerates stuff. Here you might think that it's because of this specific rune that Echo manages to build the Z-Drive, and that the Z-Drive is the reason why they managed to win at the end. However, that's not quite the case, there's more to it than that. So again, stay tuned until the end because I will explain all of that later. Echo says he can go back about a second. Powder suggests he should try going further back and throws him a stopwatch which looks exactly like the one from his universe. He pulls the cord and once again we see Jayce's rune. We see the infinity symbol, which is also present in various notes from the trio, obviously representing time while also resembling an hourglass. Echo tries going further than 4 seconds, which causes Heimer to explode. A couple things to note here. First, the 4 seconds part is a reference to how in League, Echo's ultimate allows him to return to the position he was 4 seconds prior. Second, when Jayce returns to his proper universe, Viktor tells him that he too was touched by the Arcane. I believe this also applies to Echo and Heimerdinger. They have also been touched and now behave differently. Heimerdinger here likely explodes because of that, and later Echo is going to show some immunity to Viktor's powers. Heimer convinces Echo to attend the party while he gives the machine a boost, and he says, "What's the point of a device like this if you don't enjoy the time you have?" Which obviously makes Echo realize he should try to enjoy the time he has left in that universe. We then cut back to Jayce, now climbing the hex gates. Notice here in this shot the clock from the gates, and Jinx's hideout crashed onto it. The first hint that this isn't just a universe ravaged by the anomaly. This is a universe where they failed to stop Viktor. Not only that, but everything that happened in the main universe also happened here until a certain point, which, as I'll explain later, confirms that this is not just an alternate universe, but a future of our main universe. Then we go back to the last drop at the party the day before the Inventors competition, and we get this very touching moment between Echo and Benzo, which is interrupted by Vander, who says Powder has been excited about working with Echo on the Z-Drive. And we then see Silco, and he does have the injury on his left eye, but as we see, it was not treated by Shimmer. It's impossible to know what happened to Silco after Violet died, but perhaps her death brought him and Vander back together. They were the best friends of her mother after all. Echo asks Silco if he didn't try to kill Vander, which honestly he could have asked any of the two, but Silco says, "Greatest thing we can do in life is find the power to forgive," which is also going to apply to Echo forgiving Jinx. It's also cool that Silco says power here, as that's also in one of his most iconic quotes, "Power only comes to those who will do anything to achieve it." And overall, this is such a nice moment, because it proves that both of them would have achieved their shared dream of the nation of Zon, if things had gone differently. Then the lights go out and we see Powder pulling this trigger, which is exactly like the one from Jinx's minigun. In fact, we'll see a similar frame later in the last episode. Here it's just used to turn on some lights and pop some balloons. The DJ pops in this disc, which is likely a reference to Rakan and Xayah. Notice the color schemes and the feathers. We see this nice moment between Vander's sons as his daughter arrives behind them. We get this shot of her walking, which is almost the same as one of the first shots we ever saw of the show. Then we get this beautiful scene of Powder and Echo dancing. The song's lyrics are about Echo's relationship with his Jinx and how he still cares for her despite her being basically his biggest enemy for years. Here we can also see Powder has a part of her hair dyed in pink, likely because of her sister. Then we get this shot, which is the same as when Violet tried to reassure Powder in Season 1. That moment never happened in this universe, as Violet died before they returned to Zon. This shot will also return at the end with Echo alone. Echo thanks her for everything and says, "I used to dream the Undercity could be like this, but somewhere I got consumed by all the ways it wasn't. I gave up on it, gave up on you." He's obviously talking about his Undercity and his Powder. He gave up on her, like he told Vi in Season 1, her sister was gone, it's all Jinx now. The importance of this episode is to show us the potential of Zon and the potential of Jinx and Echo as people who can contribute positively for the city. Like this Powder, Echo has been holding back in many ways because, as he said it, at some point he stopped believing in the dream. This episode is also here so that Echo doesn't lose hope on Jinx. It's because of what he experiences here that later he's going to go after his own Jinx and convince her to help against the Noxians and Viktor. This shot of her leaning on him will come back at the end, but only with Echo. He says how he wishes he could stay in that moment, and she returns with his line from earlier, sometimes taking a leap forward means leaving a few things behind. And he says he promises he won't forget this. It's not clear if Powder really knows this isn't her Echo. I think it's left vague on purpose, but I believe at this point she knows. Either way, Echo asks if they can pretend it's their first time, which is the title of the episode, and well, for him it literally is his first time kissing her, that's why he asked, and to be honest, this might actually be his first kiss ever. They kiss and God, I cried during this episode. What could have been? right? And we transition from the lovebirds to the apocalypse. It's so jarring. We were already seeing chromatic aberration being used alongside the anomaly textures, but now we'll also start seeing some visual glitches as well. Jayce finally reaches the top of the X gates. This shot is going to come back later when we get a flashback of Viktor revealing himself here, but is also going to show up before that when Jayce arrives at the top of the X gates from his own universe. And as I will explain when we get there, this confirms that this Jayce right here is the Jayce that failed to stop Viktor. These dragonflies are similar to the one from the hideout in the universe of Powder. Speaking of which, we go back to that shot, but now she's alone. She starts playing with this necklace. We can actually see both of their faces here. These blue parts are likely made out of the blue crystals, meaning this was a gift from Echo. It also explains why Powder felt the anomaly glitch. It was because of the necklace. We then see what caused the glitch. It was Heimerdinger setting up the machine that will take Echo back. We return to our Jayce, where we see the dragonfly land on the Jayce from that universe. And you might remember this shot as it also appeared in the last act when Jayce was having flashbacks. Jayce realizes that it was there that the end of Piltover started and questions why the mage gave him the crystal. And yes, here Jayce thinks that Viktor is the mage from his childhood, but that's not actually the case, and it's then that the mage starts walking toward him. Here we are going to cut back to Echo, and we'll only see what happened between this scene of Jayce and the next one in the last episode. We can see the final form of the Z-Drive, different from what we are used to, but still quite familiar. As Echo and Heimer prepare to leave, we return to Jayce asking Viktor to send him back. At this point we don't know it's Viktor, but Jayce already knows. Viktor commands the Jayce automaton to let go of the hammer, and our Jayce takes it. Back to Heimer and Echo, where Heimer tells Echo that ever since he met him, he truly lived. Which is a very heartfelt moment because Echo truly gave Heimer a different perspective on life. It's not enough to give people what they need to survive, you need to give them what they need to live. Heimer jumps out of the machine and cranks it up. Jayce says, "I won't fail," the line he kept hearing over and over in the last act. We see Viktor's hand in a familiar shot. In season 1 it was the mage teleporting Jayce to another place in the world, then in the previous act it was Viktor yoinking Jayce to the future, and now he's returning Jayce to his own time. And we see this anomaly here. This is likely the same anomaly that was in the X gates in our universe, because as I mentioned, this is the future of that universe, or a potential future. We see the moment when Jayce's crystal merged with him. The crystal is going to come back at the end. We see this shot, which was also in the previous act. Viktor sends Jayce back. We can see him in the same exact pose from when he shows up again at the X gates in the previous act. And at this point we're seeing both Echo and Jayce return, but since we only see Jayce arriving, it's hard to say if Echo returned before or after him. The next time we see him is when Jinx is in her hideout trying to end her life, which might also mean that Echo didn't return to the gates, maybe he returned to the Jinx hideout from his universe, but that's just speculation on my part. Heimer sacrifices himself to send Echo back, or did he? You see, I don't think Heimerdinger actually died here. I've seen people say he's a Yordle so he can't actually die, which is true, but in truth, Yordles are magical spiritual beings. They can't die of old age or natural causes, but something as magical as the anomaly is far from that. Speaking of which, I do think Heimer was sent off somewhere, maybe to another timeline, who knows, but I don't think he's dead. Then we see the Echo from this timeline on the ground, and our Echo back on his own body, inside the machine with the Z-Drive. He and Powder look at each other one last time before he leaves. If she didn't know before that wasn't her Echo, she definitely knows now. Then we see her hiding the necklace on a drawer labeled Vi, alongside the crystals from Jayce's lab, again hinting that this necklace came from our Echo. And so this episode ends. Moving to episode 8 now, we are back to the usual disc because we are back to our main universe. This episode begins with Mel, right where we last saw her. Using her magic, she breaks free of the Black Rose chains, and we get a couple of cool frames. She also transforms, quote unquote, here, and the sequence reminds me of transformations in Sentai or Sailor Moon. We see her tattoos changing, and she gets a different hairstyle and outfit. Why? Because it's cool, that's mostly it. We can then see that she's in the same place from her flashback in season 1, which seems to have been abandoned for quite some time, and we can see a rose beneath her, as well as some spines with chains, clearly showing that Mel was under some kind of spell from the Black Rose, a spell that trapped her mind in an illusion and transported her body to this place. Then we see the lady from the flashback, but the one speaking is likely LeBlanc, the leader of the Black Rose. This is when Mel learns she's a mage. After Act 2, people were speculating on who the father of Mel could be, but honestly I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't matter. We know of powerful and or unique mages like Lux and Silas, and we know nothing about their powers being hereditary, so maybe the idea that Mel's father was some kind of aspect host or a powerful mage might be far from the truth. For now, I don't think her father really matters, but I think we are going to get this information soon, either from the novel of Ambessa or somewhere else. The woman then reveals that each mage has their own expression, which is in line with the mages we've seen outside of Arcane. But what's interesting is that she says that Mel's expression is quite rare. An empath, attuned to the ethereal, able to sense others' inner selves and bend their magic, a conduit and a mirror. This is how the woman describes Mel's powers, and these rare powers in specific are, in my opinion, why the Black Rose wants Mel so much. Now, by the description alone, these powers might seem familiar to Silas, however, as we'll see, it seems that Mel can do more than just sense other mages. She can sense their inner selves, their true intentions. And unlike Silas, she seems to have magic of her own that she can channel without having to absorb it from someone else first. And some of you might be thinking, what about Seraphine? Her powers also seem to be linked to empathy. I don't really have an answer for that, and well, does Seraphine even exist? Something else to point out here are LeBlanc's markings on the woman's eyes, hinting again that this is indeed LeBlanc speaking, and the girl still has her necklace on, the same from Mel's flashback. Then we get this shot from the trailer. Turns out this wasn't an illusion or Elora, just another form of LeBlanc. I assume this is either a clone or a projection, and she's not actually here. In this shot we see their full appearance, fully cloaked in shadow with yellow eyes and eye marks, and only their hands visible. On the spines we can spot some runes. Mel confronts the woman, saying that since she can see through her mask, she's a threat to her, which might be true. If Mel is a mage that can see through the illusions of the Black Rose, it would be wise for them to recruit her and try to use her power. It's not like they can't kill her. LeBlanc says herself in a couple seconds that a blade would be more than enough, but the Black Rose seeks power and they want to use Mel. The woman also says this as she transforms into her brother, perhaps alluding that the blade was enough to kill him as well. As she transforms from Kinu to Ambessa and to Mel, she explains how Ambessa didn't lie about Kinu's death. The Rose did kill him, but the woman says that she gave Ambessa every opportunity to atone for her transgressions. Now, what were those transgressions? We do not know. This will likely be revealed in the upcoming book. The woman says Ambessa chose pride over her own son, and that Mel doesn't need to bear her crimes. It's here Mel realizes that the Rose is trying to recruit her. Then we get this infamous line from the trailer. The Arcane is waking up. I've seen a lot of people confused about what the Arcane is, and from my understanding and from what Christian has said, I'm pretty sure the Arcane is just magic. The magic in the show doesn't seem to be one-to-one to what we have in the lore. In the lore we have three main types of magic: celestial, elemental, and spirit magic. In the show, this doesn't seem to be an idea that they are keeping. I could be wrong, but it seems like they are merging all of them together. However, this is more just a feeling that I have, and there's no solid confirmation of it at the moment. So for now, we can just assume that Arcane means magic in general, including all three types of magic that we know of. Now, the interesting part here is, if Arcane is just a term Piltovans use for magic, why does LeBlanc also use that term? Is it because it is indeed a new term that is familiar to many regions and parts of Runeterra, or is LeBlanc just speaking in terms that are familiar to Mel, or maybe both? As an illusion forms around the two ladies, LeBlanc says, a calamity is approaching, rivaling even the ancient rune wars. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with the rune wars where people used and fought over the world runes, which are ancient artifacts capable of reshaping the world. It's cool to see an important part of the timeline being mentioned here, and rune wars was also likely what we saw depicted in Heimerdinger's flashback. Though that doesn't make that much sense considering Heimerdinger is really young in Arcane, but hey, fuck it, am I right? Here we also learn that LeBlanc was trying to stop Ambessa because she knew of the calamity that will be caused by Viktor. The first figure is Ambessa, and this right here is Viktor. And we saw the result of this calamity in the previous episode, in the timeline where Jayce was transported to. We can see that Viktor here looks very similar to the mage from Heimer's flashback. And in this shot, the background seems to be Piltover, but it's very reminiscent of the flashback of the rune wars we see in Rise's cinematic. Considering that Viktor looked like the mage from Heimer's flashback, it's possible that the Rose is just using actual imagery of the rune wars, since they mention how Viktor's calamity would be similar. And here we can even see some people in the background. Through this, Mel then understands that the Rose wants her to stop her own mother, and LeBlanc tells her how her brother also thought that Ambessa was always doing what she thought was best for their family. And he thought this until he found out Ambessa had planned Mel's whole life, including hiding her in Piltover, because she is what Ambessa covets the most, a weapon. And if you remember, in the last act, Singed told Ambessa he was expecting her because he could see that she had the look of someone who covets a weapon. It's here that LeBlanc tells Mel she's now part of the Rose, and that there's no going back. LeBlanc gives her the necklace, and as we'll see, Mel is going to use it to defeat her mother, and she's also going to double-cross the Rose. She also mentions that those untouched by the Arcane fear them, which, well, yeah, people without magic probably do fear a secret magical cabal that's manipulating people from the shadows and keeping demons and monsters in their possession. But I think even someone who's a mage would probably fear that. Though I think in general she's talking about people fearing magic, which, as I'll mention later, doesn't really make that much sense for the Noxus that we know of. As Mel puts it on, we see it disappearing, and it's only going to be visible again when she reveals it during the fight with Ambessa. Here I wanna say that I think this plot of Mel and the Black Rose is really cool for me because I'm a League lore fan. I get all the reference to the Cabal and the Rune Wars, but I think the show could have gone without it. It's pretty disconnected from everything else going on. You could have easily removed it and changed Ambessa slightly and the rest of the story would have still worked fine. Which is not a good argument, I know, but I feel like in this season they tried to show and do so much more that a plot like this maybe could have been cut. I have to say that yes, Mel and Ambessa's relationship and story are in line with the themes of the show. Ambessa lied to Mel to protect her and a lot of what she knew about her life was a lie, but I feel like they could have done that without the Black Rose and Mel being a mage. But I'll come back to this at the end when I give my full review of the season. With this being said, it's more than likely that this is a setup for the Noxian show. Speaking of which, this transitions into a shot of a raven. Ravens have appeared before in the show, but not with red eyes. We know these red-eyed crows are tied to Swain because of one of the last shots from the show. We also get a better look at the location Mel is at. I'm not sure where this takes place. Ionia seemed the most likely in the previous season, but this could very well be somewhere in Valorant. We also don't know how Mel returned to Piltover, as the next time we'll see her, she's already there. Also, I haven't mentioned this yet, but these scenes take place either during or before the time skip, hence why Mel arrives in Piltover after Jayce returns. And LeBlanc calls Mel's sister once again. I think this time it's obvious that she isn't using the term because both of them are related, more so because there's an allegiance between the two. Mel is technically part of the Cabal now. We then see the funeral of Rictus, a reminder that this was probably the person Ambessa trusted the most, and he was killed by Vander in the last act. We can see the emotion in her eyes, it's so well animated. We see Noxian soldiers lowering his body and burying him. A big contrast between this funeral and the funeral of Caitlyn's mother. This is a Noxian funeral, for a soldier who died in battle. It's more simple, more practical. Like Caitlyn, Ambessa hides her emotions very well, so this is another parallel between the two. We see Singed sticking a tube on Warwick's heart for the blood transfusion. At this point, we go back and forth between Ambessa and Singed. We see Ricta's weapon, still with the runes, then Viktor's cocoon. It's never explained where this came from, it might have just been the X-Core in Viktor adapting to keeping him alive. As Singed prepares the needle, we can see the cocoon react exactly like the first one from Act 1. Ambessa takes out the runes from the weapon, and she then gives us this line from the trailer. We do not lament a warrior's death, we avenge it. Except in the trailers, she only said a death, not a warrior's death. She then sticks the weapon on the grave, keeping the runes as she's going to use them later. Then we see the aftermath of the last act, with Viktor's followers on the ground. Singed says Warwick's blood will sustain Viktor for a while, but beyond that it's up to him. As we learned in the previous act, Warwick's blood is powerful enough to keep Viktor alive and let him achieve his full potential. That's why he only transforms after this transfusion. Ambessa mentions how Singed promised a cure for death, and he says it's dependent on Viktor's survival. Ambessa seeks this cure to form a powerful army, as we'll see in a second. Viktor then starts speaking with Singed. As he does, the fingerprints on his followers start to glow. He tells Singed he is grateful to him as he now sees a more lucid world, likely an effect of him transforming due to Warwick's blood, and this is also in line with his last words from the previous act, where he said he understood Singed's point of view. As he talks, he starts inhabiting his followers, speaking through them and saying that they are now one. That is the glorious evolution according to him. Or it could have been, as he's still close to dying. He then mentions the anomaly on the X-Gates, and how it could be used to finish Singed's transformation. Ambessa asks if that would allow him to evolve others. Again, this is what she wants. Viktor then says he's too weak to fight against Jayce's defense, and so he and Ambessa make a deal. The anomaly in exchange for Viktor to evolve soldiers for Ambessa. I don't see why Viktor would keep his promise Jinx here, and as we'll see, he never ever evolves any of Ambessa's men, only his followers. We see some beefed up soldiers later, but those are likely just Singed's doing. And as Viktor starts evolving his followers, we see Sky in shock, and then Ambessa as well. We don't get to see it here, but by evolving, Viktor means transforming them into the mannequins we've seen in the previous act. We then jump right to what happened after the ending of Act 2. So in case you're not keeping up, we were on Act 2, went back to see what happened to Echo, Jayce and Heimerdinger, went back to see what happened to Mel, then jump forward to see what Ambessa, Singed and Viktor are doing now, and then jump back to the ending of Act 2. But actually these are just Vi's memories, as we see Caitlyn helping her, Jayce telling them to leave, as well as Isha and Vander. The last time we saw Vi, she protected Jinx from the explosion, so that's likely why she's unconscious while Caitlyn isn't. Then Vi wakes up and mistakes Loris for Vander, not the first Vander hallucination we've seen from her. Also, Loris talks for the first time here. I don't think this is Caitlyn's bedroom, but it's very similar, so this is likely a room in Caitlyn's house. Maybe even the one where Vi stayed after the Rocket hit the council. Vi then asks Loris about Jinx, and he hesitates to answer. I think this was more for us the audience to wonder if she was heavily injured or not. We then transition to Caitlyn and Maddie, planning out the defense. We can see that Ambessa's fleet is coming from the east toward the X-Gates. Caitlyn says they can't negotiate with Ambessa after her betrayal. As Maddie tries to comfort her, she again doesn't let her. Behind Caitlyn, we can see a rifle similar to the one she had in Season 1. Vi then bursts in, which again might imply that the bedroom was indeed in Caitlyn's house. Behind her, we get a better look at the ballerina painting we've seen in the other acts. Again, this might have been a hint toward Oriana. Here we learn that Jinx was arrested, Caitlyn excuses Maddie, but after leaving, she not only does not close the door, but also stays and listens to their conversation. I think us the audience are meant to think that she's jealous of Vi, especially after Caitlyn denied her seconds earlier, but this might actually have been the first hint that Maddie was working for Ambessa. Here, Caitlyn explains that getting arrested was Jinx's idea, and the only thing that she cared about was getting Vi to safety. Here we learn that Jinx waiting for Singed, and maybe also Caitlyn to arrive, might have also been part of Vi's plan. I'm not sure how this works. She either warned Jinx before leaving the commune, or she went back there after making her plan with Caitlyn, and then returned to get arrested in front of Ambessa. Caitlyn points out that Jinx was Vi's contingency plan because she didn't trust Caitlyn enough. And obviously this makes sense, Caitlyn was working for Ambessa after all. Vi then calls Caitlyn out for siding with Ambessa while Ambessa was manipulating her. And Caitlyn replies that she knows. Again, Caitlyn is smart. She knew that Ambessa was trying to control her. Ambessa herself even said that Caitlyn didn't trust her. But Caitlyn was also still dealing with her mother's death. And instead of taking the time to cope and grieve, she was giving a huge amount of power. The pain and pressure got the better of her, and she let Ambessa take control. That's why she angrily replies here. She knows what she did, she's upset with herself about it. She's upset that she let her hate for Jinx get the better of her. Caitlyn explains that Jinx was the one that surrendered and that she was immediately apprehended. Vi tries to convince Caitlyn that Jinx changed. She replies by saying that we can't erase our mistakes, and Vi scoffs off, asking who decides who gets a second chance. And Caitlyn is left thinking about this. This will lead to the next shot. We cut back to the bunker's elevator, the same shot from the previous acts. Then we see the prison underground, maybe the same one Caitlyn mentioned when interrogating Singed. Either way, because of the elevator shot, this might be the same location as the underground council. Caitlyn approaches Jinx with her food. This enforcer right here will show up a couple times in the background of other scenes. As Caitlyn slides the food into the cell, we can see that Jinx hasn't eaten the previous meal. I'm pretty sure these are the same fruits that Milo eats in Season 1. Jinx tells Caitlyn to kill her if that's what she's there to do. First hint that this Jinx has fully given up on her life, which makes sense considering this takes place after the death of Isha, and as far as she knows, possibly of Vander as well. And just like after the explosion of Act 1, Jinx probably blames herself for everything. Then we get this back and forth between Caitlyn and Jinx, where Caitlyn tries to convince Jinx to join her side and account for her actions. Jinx, however, has fully given up on everything, including herself. Hating you, I've hated myself, is what Caitlyn says. Again, Caitlyn is aware of the person she became because of what she did for vengeance, but she also says that she doesn't have the energy to hate Jinx anymore. Jinx tells her she didn't know her mother was on the council. She also says that it probably wouldn't have made a difference, which is true. But what Jinx is trying to say here is that she's sorry for what happened to Caitlyn. Jinx knows well what it's like to lose a family member. Caitlyn then leaves, but I think this might have been the line that convinced her that Jinx did indeed change. A reminder that the last time Caitlyn saw Jinx, before all of this, was the night she kidnapped her and killed her mother. She has barely seen the post-issued Jinx, and well, now she's seeing Jinx at her lowest. All that anger that she felt toward Jinx is slowly dissipating as she sees her in this state. For Jinx, I think this conversation only confirms that while she is alive, Caitlyn and Vi can't be happy together. We then cut to another red-eyed raven, probably the same we saw before, as the last one was flying around Mel and this one is looking at her. So this raven from Swain is likely following Mel around. Again, this is Mel returning to Piltover from the location where the Black Rose took her. We don't know for how long she was in that illusion and how long it took her to get here, though it's not really that relevant. She's now wearing these white robes to hide her new tattoos. I'll mention her clothes again in a bit. In the background we can see some familiar faces, including who I believe is the Zonate that was thrown into the arcade by the Enforcers in Season 1. We get the same shot of the council from the previous acts, except now it's been fully rebuilt, though the damage on the table still remains. We can see Jayce here, likely after a shower and a change of clothes. He touches the table and sees flashbacks of the aftermath of the rocket, the cracks on the table being a reminder of that day. It was the rocket that almost killed Viktor, leading Jayce to do what he thought was right, saving Viktor with the X-Core, which would then lead to that desolate future he experienced. And this is why we transition from Viktor's body to Jayce's hammer. His mission now is to stop Viktor. Mel then arrives, all sexy and suspicious. Jayce gets ready, but Mel reveals herself. She asks what happened to him, but it doesn't answer, and she says something happened to her as well. I don't think they ever fully explain what happened to each other, and to be honest, I can't blame them, both situations are really crazy. However, Jayce becomes suspicious of Mel, as he realizes she was the reason both of them survived the attack. She tries to explain she didn't, and still doesn't fully understand her powers. Jayce, however, doesn't trust her, and he says that he knows Mel used him and Viktor for X-Tech. Though here, Jayce knows more than Mel, as he saw what X-Tech will eventually do to Piltover. Jayce says she called them investments. Mel describes the duo as brilliant inventors who carried magic from myth to machine, as Jayce begins to glitch, and we'll see why in a second. But also it's interesting how we are still getting reminded that yes, X-Tech is the combination of magic and technology, because as we'll see, the technology part is going to take a huge backseat, especially as we get to the new Viktor. On one of the glitches we can see Jayce looking forward. We then transition to Mel's face, then to Jayce's eyes, and then to this anomaly effect. A couple seconds later to this flashback of the other timeline. A couple more glitches, and Jayce remembers the automatons. He's likely remembering what he felt around the automatons, because now there's one near him in the same room. He readies his hammer and shoots at that automaton that was spying on him, leaving a hole in the pillar that causes anomaly textures to spill out and the rubble to remain suspended in the air. We then see for the first time one of Viktor's evolved followers, which I've been calling automatons. These transitions to Viktor in his astral plane as he begins to speak through the automaton. Viktor said Jayce could have joined him in the labors of their work, but Jayce refutes by saying what Viktor did to those people he did alone, which is true. Viktor is becoming blinded by what he calls the glorious evolution, and Jayce wants nothing to do with it, because of how unethical it is, but also because Jayce has seen where Viktor's evolution ends. Responding to Jayce's words and attacks, we see the automaton's speed. Viktor replies that he is no longer alone. This is going to be relevant later, as the old Viktor tells Jayce how lonely he is. Viktor says he speaks with all of his followers' voices. Basically, he took their humanity and autonomy from them. Viktor says he would rather get the anomaly peacefully than have Ambessa storm Piltover. He then approaches Mel as she uses her magic to shield herself. However, her barrier is nothing to Viktor, so thankfully Jayce shoots the automaton, which then glitches, likely because of the shot. Jayce tries to strike the automaton, but it dodges. Here Viktor says Jayce's mind has become rigid, but notice how he never once tried to actually read Jayce's mind, and even when he does later, he doesn't immediately get Jayce's memories of the other universe, despite being flashed with Vander's and Sinch's memories the moment he touched them. Viktor then says that this chain of events, everything that happened thus far, started with Jayce, and that is sort of true. Jayce was the one that wanted to create magic, and everything in the show happened because of that. From the explosion on his lab, to the explosion that killed Milo and Klager, to the X-Gates and the X-Core. However, some people are still stuck on that time loop thing and think that Viktor might have been the one that actually started this, but as I'll explain later, that's not the case. Viktor then overpowers Jayce and asks him to join his glorious evolution as partners, to which Jayce replies that his partner died in that that room. He could be saying this metaphorically, as it was in that room that both of them were on the same side and agreed with each other for the last time, but he could also mean this literally, as I wouldn't be surprised if Viktor was indeed dead before he merged with the X-Core. Then, as Viktor grabs Jayce by the neck, he starts looking at the hammer, which is glitching. In his astral plane, we see this. I assume this is the X-Tech gem inside the hammer, after years of being in the other timeline. Viktor is so blinded by it, he almost chokes Jayce to death, until Mel wakes up and intervenes. We can also see Mel's energy in that astral plane. It shows up as this gold cloud. Together, Jayce and Mel blast Viktor's automaton, severing its connection to Viktor. As it collapses to the floor, we can see some kind of fluid flowing out of the fingerprint holes. We see Viktor exhausted, which is probably because he's not at his full potential yet. He's still very much dying. We see Sky trying to comfort him, but he doesn't let her. Instead, he turns to Singed and tells him to start the process. I think this shows that despite everything, Viktor still yearned for Jayce. He wanted Jayce to be on his side, but after Jayce turned him down and was able to overpower an automaton with Mel, Viktor gave up on that. Well, not exactly, as we'll see in the next episode when he approaches Jayce once again. We then return to Jinx, still in prison, as she toys with the gem. Just like in Season 1, when Vi imagined Vander talking to her, Jinx is now going to imagine Silco. Silco's damage eye is X-Tech blue instead of orange. I'm not sure what that represents though. He says, a spark of rebellion still burns inside that husk. Remember that even though she's imagining Silco saying this, in truth, she's saying this to herself. When Jinx says killing isn't a mercy, Silco replies, killing is a cycle. The name of the episode. He says this cycle started long ago before him and Vander, and that it will continue long after Jinx and Vi. Jinx is obviously thinking of all the deaths that happened around her because of her. She says she's done running in circles, she's done being this person that brings ruin and death wherever she goes. We build our own prisons. Bars forged of oaths, codes, commitments, walls of self-doubt and accepted limitation. We inhabit these cells, these identities, and call them us. An important part of Jinx's character in this season is her identity issues. Powder is long gone, and Jinx was never who she truly was. It was a facade she put up because of her trauma and the expectations around her, but soon it became all there was of her, until Isha came along, someone with no preconceived knowledge of Jinx. Because of her, this new hero Jinx became real, but now that she's gone, she can no longer keep that up. We saw how lost and purposeless she felt in the previous act, and now those feelings are dialed to 11, so much so she's given up on her. On what could be, on everything. Silco then says that the cycle only ends when you find the will to walk away. This is what she wants to do, to give up, to break the cycle of pain by killing herself. Throughout this speech, she's playing with the X-Tech gem, which shares the same color as Silco's eye. Again, I'm not sure what it represents, but for her it all started with the crystals from Jayce, and it was with the gem that she built the rocket. And it was with the gems that Isha killed herself. So, in a way, her path was intertwined with X-Tech, the person she became. Vi then shows up, saying she swiped the keys to break her free. Vi says, if you come, help, use that explosive potential of yours for good, maybe we could rewrite your story like you did with Zon. Vi wants Jinx to embrace her full potential, to do good. Jinx realizes Vi will never give up on her, Vi will never walk away. For Jinx, this means the cycle will never end as long as they're together. She punches Vi and locks her up in the cell. You don't need to worry about me anymore, you don't need to feel guilty about being happy, you deserve to be with her. As Jinx sees it, she's in the way of Vi's own happiness. She cannot be happy with Jinx and with Caitlyn. Not after everything Jinx did. For Vi to be happy, Jinx has to break the cycle. As she leaves, Vi cries. We'll come to her in a moment, but obviously for her, her sister was all she had left. We see her punching the wall inside the cell, likely a callback to the first thing we see her do after the time skip in Season 1. We transition back to Mel and Jayce. And here I want to point out Mel's white robes. White in Mel seems to represent her ties to Piltover. In Season 1, her outfit was primarily white, except when her mother arrived, where she wore a black outfit. An important part of Mel in this season, as she'll say in a bit, is that how all of her life she tried to live up to the ideals and expectations of her family. Now, while she wears these white robes, underneath them are black clothes. And by the end of the show, she'll ditch the whites entirely, and she's even going to wear a bit of red, embracing her role as a Noxian leader of the House Medarda. Jayce apologizes for his suspicions And here we get the moment of Mel also having identity issues. Her whole life she tried to be a Medarda, but it was all a lie. Not only the fact that she was born out of an affair, but also everything else in her life. She didn't know that she was a mage, she didn't know that that was the reason she was sent to this city. She says her blood is alien to her as she looks at her tattoos. I wonder if the implication here is that these powers were inherited from her father, or that simply she never truly knew her mother and her intentions. Either way, Mel is saying that she isn't a Medarda. But later in the next episode, she's gonna say that her mother is the one that isn't a Medarda. And as Mel takes her place as the leader of the house Medarda, she'll be the one deciding what the Medarda are, what they represent, what their ideals are. Jayce comforts her as we transition to a new scene on the council room. We can see the families of Piltover, but also Sevika and Scar. Sevika being the closest thing Zon has to a Cam Baron, and Scar being probably the leader of the Firelights, it makes sense for them to be called here. Though I wonder why they agreed to do that. Everyone is looking at each other, there's a lot of tension, and Jayce breaks it. He shows everyone the automaton and speaks of the war that is to come, asking for the help of both Piltovans and Zonites. At this point we'll get a montage of people deciding whether they want to fight for the city or not. We see the enforcers taking down the barricades in the Undercity, this family is showing up later. We get this shot here, which we also saw in that alternate timeline. Some of the rich families turn their back and leave. We see Loris training some civilians. We get this shot of this guy, he appeared before playing piano. He's the one that will take Loris' place in the machine that was shooting containers, and he's the one that managed to hit Viktor's cocoon. Sevika and Scar obviously turn away from this, like we the audience know how major this war is, Jayce does too, but Sevika and Scar are probably like, these crazy ass Piltovans never did anything for us and now want us to help against this random ass war. You guys were committing war crimes on our side of the city not that long ago. Fuck this. We see some people evacuating, we see this family again, the mom and the child leave while the father stays to fight in the war. We see the enforcers getting ready, including the piano guy. In the background here we can see the machine that they'll later use to throw containers. Here's a better look at it. Loris is getting instructions from Jayce, he'll later be the one piloting the machine. We see people leaving the city, and we have this nice shot of the outskirts of Piltover. These on the left should be the X-Gates, as we'll see, and here we see one of the Jinxers, the one that has a band in the good timeline. Here she is leaving the city, but as we'll see, she will join the enforcers. And in this shot we can see a Poro. Here's a shot of the X-Gates, and down there we can see the same shore from the other shot, confirming that that was indeed the X-Gates on the left. Here are a few Zonites joining the enforcers, including the Jinxer, the father, and a couple background characters we've seen in other scenes. We then see Jayce at the X-Gates. He's not shutting them down yet, because the people are still using it to leave the city. Then we go back to Vi, and as Caitlyn approaches her, we get this shot, which is the exact same one from when Caitlyn approached her in Stillwater and they met for the first time. Vander also has a similar one in Act 1 of Season 1. Here, Vi says Caitlyn was right, and that she shouldn't have gone behind her back and tried to free Jinx. She feels like she lost everyone. Obviously, things with Caitlyn aren't good, and now Jinx also ran away. She's alone again. However, Caitlyn reveals that she knew Vi would come for Jinx, and that it was because of her that the prison wasn't guarded. Then Vi jumps at her and kisses her. This might seem like a weird moment for a lot of people, but if we think about it, it's not that weird. For starters, yes, Jinx went off to kill herself, but at this point, not even we the audience knew that. Yes, in hindsight, it might look like Vi is having sex while her sister went to kill herself, and that looks really bad, but Vi didn't know that. She thought her sister just gave up on them again. As I said, Vi basically thought she was alone, that she lost everyone. When Caitlyn told her that she helped her get to Jinx, it was a confirmation for Vi that Caitlyn still cared, that Caitlyn had not left her. That's why she embraced Caitlyn like this. She's all she has now. Is it the most logical reasoning? Probably not. But we as humans don't always do the most logical things. Personally, I don't think this scene is as bad as people are describing it. Yes, Vi is doing this in prison with someone who is on the side of the people that oppressed her whole life, while her sister went to end herself. But again, not even us the viewers knew about the latter. And while I think the former is valid, to an extent, it only really works if we ignore Caitlyn's and Vi's relationship and everything that happened in Season 1. I think there are worse things happening in this season than this scene, like the fact that Vi and Echo barely interact again, like she doesn't even acknowledge him despite the fact that she hasn't seen him in a long time. In this season, everything moves on so fast and some of the most important conversations don't happen or happen off screen. Like this is one of the last moments where Vi and Caitlyn actually have a conversation, before the last one that we see in the next episode. Anyways, here I like how Vi doesn't give a damn about Maddie. Caitlyn is all she has. If she's there for Vi now, that's all that matters. Throughout this scene, I also like how Caitlyn initially hesitates a bit, but she does embrace Vi, a huge contrast from when Maddie tried to touch her. We then transition to Mel as she approaches Viktor's commune. We see Ambessa hitting up Viktor's runes. As one of the guards escorts Mel, we see various Noxian graves. We again see the runes. I assume hitting them is how they are powered up, because we also see Rictus do that in the previous act. Mel arrives and I just love the difference in expression in Ambessa's face, from before she sees Mel to after. You can really feel the joy and relief in her eyes. Ambessa tries to embrace her, but Mel doesn't move. Mel reveals that she's aware of the rose, and Ambessa becomes defensive. She explains her son got tangled in the Black Rose's web, and Mel asks if Ambessa let him die, to which she replies by slapping her in the face. Then she opens up how much she loved him, and that's the reason the rose took him from her. In truth, yes, Ambessa let him die, but she did it so that Mel could live. Ambessa reiterates that what she did was for their family. Mel tells Ambessa to give up on her feud, and that if she does, she'll live with her and avenge Kino. Ambessa tells Mel this isn't about revenge, as she holds Rictus runes. Funny because earlier, when talking about him, she did say we do not lament a warrior's death, we avenge it. But here we see a speech from Ambessa which is very much against mages and their existence, because according to her, they have an advantage on the battlefield, and that goes against Noxian's ideals. If you know anything about Noxus, then you know this is bullshit. Maybe things were different under Dark Will and I don't remember, but as far as I know, Noxians accept anything and anyone onto their empire. As long as you bring strength to the empire, they don't care. As long as you're on their side, they don't care. So to me, this is either the writers furthering the idea that the arcane, or magic, in this universe is rare, which as we know is quite different from the modern Runeterra we know of, or more interestingly, this is Ambessa being a hypocrite. She doesn't care about being equals on the battlefield. Hell, she's trying to build an immortal army. No, as she herself says, desperation is the doorway to oblivion. And she is desperate. What she wants is to end the Black Rose for good. In the previous act, when describing the 3 Noxian principles of strength to Caitlyn, when she talked about guile, she mentioned magic. Magic as something the Empire uses. But it was also obvious from her words that she wasn't a fan of it. Again, I think she just hates magic because of what the Black Rose did to her family. Though maybe this is me just trying to justify these lines with the context of the Noxus that we've known for years, when the writers might be going in a completely different direction when it comes to Noxus' relationship with magic and magic in general in the world of Runeterra. I hope they aren't, but we'll have to wait and see where the lore goes from here. Anyway, here she wraps the runes around her arm while saying that through cunning, sweat and steel, we shape our destinies. As you may already know, these runes are the same ones from the item Kyanic Rukern, and the flavor of that item references this specific line. One of Ambessa's quotes in League is also a reference to it. The fact that Mel tried to talk to Ambessa to stop her means, according to her, that she still doesn't have what it takes to bring down the rose. In other words, she's still the fox, not the wolf. As we'll see, Mel will prove her wrong. She then reveals to Mel Viktor's automatons, calling them an army that never fears death, and Ambessa implies that this is the way she found to defeat the Black Rose. With Swain being so opposed to the Rose, it makes sense why his ravens are spying on Mel. It's likely that they have also been spying on Ambessa and everything she has done against the Rose. Again, these here are just the followers of Viktor that were in the commune. We'll see them transform in a moment. In the background, we see Viktor's cocoon floating. At this point, he's still in there. We then get a flashback to the moment Jayce and Mel defeated the automaton, and Viktor told Singed to begin the process. As Singed pumps Warwick's blood into Viktor, Sky begins to fade. In the last act, I speculated that the X-Core and Sky were tied somehow, and that everything we saw from her was the X-Core adapting to give Viktor what he wanted and what he needed. But now, after being shot by Jayce and being pumped with Warwick's blood, Viktor no longer needs the X-Core. He's reaching his full potential. There's no more need to adapt and evolve. He's reaching his pinnacle. And so, he no longer needs Sky, especially not now that his ideals and morals have shifted so far from the ones of the man she knew. As they say goodbye, Viktor thanks her for her company in his solitude. Again, we get this idea that Viktor is lonely, that Sky was there because he felt lonely. And this will later culminate in the words old Viktor tells Jayce, how after everything, all he felt was loneliness. He says he will miss their talks, but she replies no, you won't. Which is true. Viktor only ever cared about Sky because he caused her death. He didn't care about her before that. Yes, he wanted to help people, but he lost himself along the way due to his condition. He became obsessed with his legacy, with his disease. Now he found immortality, but at what cost? He went from caring about people to being focused on fixing himself to then being obsessed with becoming perfect. And now he's all alone. In the last moments of this episode, we see Singed transferring Vander's blood to Viktor. We see Vander's memories fading, we see the true death of Vander. The followers rise into the air, both in the real world and in this astral plane. Viktor's cocoon also begins to float, and so does Vander. This is the moment the followers and Vander turn into automatons. And it's also when Viktor transforms, we see his face splitting and forming a new one. This is the moment Viktor's body starts matching the lack of humanity that he's displaying. And with this, we finish episode 8, which was mostly a setup for everything that's going to happen in the next one. Moving on to the next and last episode, it starts with Jinx laying down in Silco's office where his table and chair would be. We see her long hair all over the floor. Hair is usually a good aspect to emphasize a character's personality or an aspect of who they are or how they are feeling. Jinx adds 2 long braids, which not only hint at how infantile she acted and portrayed herself, but braids usually also mean that the character is holding themselves back somehow. I think for Jinx, the braids represented not only the character, the role, the box she was putting herself in, the Jinx persona, but also all the tangled trauma inside her. She gets rid of the braids in prison after Isha's death. To me, that represents her letting go of all the ifs, all the maybes, all the ideas that people had of her, and the potential she had as a person. None of that mattered now. No point keeping it up. Even the X on her chest is also missing. And now, as we'll see, she's even cutting her own hair. The hair on the floor is the hair she cut. Once again, this is her letting go, giving up on everything. She can't keep this going. Not after all the trauma, all the deaths. She believes, as she says in the previous episode, that there's no good version of her. Even when she tried to do the right thing, it failed. The lyrics of the song playing also reflect this, with lines like, "I've held on for as long as I can, for the ones that I need to defend. I've been strong every day of my life. If she wants, death could take me this time. I used to have strength, but I ran out of hope. I know it's my fault that I'm here all alone." We get this very beautiful montage featuring some shots of Jinx in scribbles, the same ones we are used to seeing being used to display her trauma. We see multiple gems being reflected all over, and we see her filling the last drop with gasoline, including Silco's chair. We see her dropping a match and setting the place on fire. Here she is in the balcony on top of the bar, and here the window in Silco's office bursts into the shape of Vander's mouth. The last drop was the place where she grew up, but now, without Silco, without Vander, without her brothers, without Vi, and soon without her, there's no more point to this place. Then, with the music still playing, we transition to her hideout, where she readies one final grenade to end her life. This is not the same type of grenade she used with Echo and tried to use with Vander. Those were shaped like chompers. This one has a monkey head and a gem inside of it, an obvious callback to the monkey that started all of her trauma. This monkey grenade will come back at the end of the episode. She pulls the pin, thinking death, or walking away, as Silco said, is the right thing to do. Here we get a better look at her short hair, which is now reminiscent of the hair of Powder from the Good Timeline. But as the explosion starts to hit her, here comes the boy savior. Echo rewinds to save her and notice how he's all dusty. This is from the explosion. Despite him going back, he remains the same, dust and everything. It's a bit unclear if this was when Echo returned from the Good Timeline or not. It would certainly explain why he's in the hideout, though he could have returned earlier and just went there looking for Jinx after what he experienced in the other timeline. Seeing Echo, however, doesn't faze her and she pulls the pin again. Echo rewinds again, we see the explosion barely touching him and the anomaly on his C drive. We also get some cool frames here and the anomaly becoming smaller as well. He almost calls Jinx Powder, probably because he spent a couple days with a version of herself that still went by that name. She pulls the pin again, he rewinds again. This time the explosion causes him to bleed, another rewind. He says, "Always a dance with you," probably a reference to how he danced with Powder, but also to how it's not easy to deal with this Jinx. He sits down and says, "See if I can talk an old friend out of blowing us up," but Jinx simply jumps with a grenade. Echo rewinds again. This time he says, "You know, I learned from someone very special that no matter what happened in the past, it's never too late to build something new." someone worth build it for. Here it could be talking about Heimerdinger or the other powder. I'm leaning on Heimer, but when he says this, Jinx looks at the Z drive with the monkeys inside, so it can honestly go either way. Still, here we have a cut and we are only going to see the duo later when they show up to help against the Noxians. Again, it's said that this season moves so fast because I would really have loved to see what happened after this scene. Like, if you think about it, Echo talked and spent more time with the other powder than with his Jinx. In the previous season, they didn't develop their relationship at all, so to remedy that, for the fight scene at the bridge, they included the visuals of them playing as kids. Before that fight, we only saw them fighting in the airship, and in Act 1 of Season 1, they didn't interact at all. The anime music video did most of the heavy lifting for their relationship pre-time skip, and initially Echo was supposed to have a flashback in Season 1, like almost every single protagonist, and this flashback would show him trying to rescue Jinx from Silco and failing. So it's unfortunate that this season again chooses to not explore them properly, instead giving us an alternate reality where they are good friends and lovers. Like, that's really cool, but the Jinx that we know has like 2 lines toward Echo. Like, this scene right here is the first and last time they talk in the whole show, not counting the scene at the bridge. Thankfully, in League we got this small minigame where we see what happens after this. Jinx goes to the Firelight's hideout and builds her new weapon. She even mentions how she remembers how Echo looked at her in the bridge. It's pretty cool, I just wish it was in the show. We then transition to the next day as the sun rises in Piltover. We see Ambessa in her ship, without Rictus, without Caitlyn, without Mel, no one by her side, no one to spar with her. The shadow of her family crest on the floor. The Piltovers are getting ready. In the underground council room, we see Vi, Caitlyn, Mel and Jayce preparing for Ambessa and Viktor's attack. I assume they're here because of how easily Viktor's automaton got into the other council room. Here, Jayce describes what we'll see later, which is the enforcers fighting the Noxians, while Jayce shuts down the gates. Mel puts down a globe which represents Viktor's cocoon, as Caitlyn asks if he's in the center of all of this. We then see a flashback of Viktor at the commune and of what's left of Jayce in the alternate timeline. Jayce says we are meant to lose this fight, alluding to that alternate reality. We then see Caitlyn comforting Vi as scenes from the fight start to flash. Here we see Vi carrying an injured enforcer. In the background are Noxian ships with their red flags, just like we saw in Mel's painting in Season 1. We see the Noxians doing what they do best, invading and fighting, and the enforcers are just outmatched. As I said before, the Piltovans are using X-Tech to shoot containers at the Noxians, one of them being Loris. The enforcer Vi is carrying turns out to be the Jinxer from the previous act, who is also present in the good timeline. Unfortunately, she dies here. Then Ambessa arrives, now with a new weapon, the same one she uses in League. Again, the enforcers are completely outmatched, but they have Caitlyn who's getting ready to shoot Ambessa. Here, I just want to point out that Caitlyn uses her right eye to aim, which is not the one that ends up injured at the end. She shoots, but Ambessa uses the stones to absorb the magic. It seems like this railgun Caitlyn is using only fires magic, not bullets. Ambessa absorbs 2 more shots before a Noxian turret spots Caitlyn. It shoots at her, and Maddie, who's right next to her, looks shocked, which is funny because she's a double agent here. Ambessa is amused by Caitlyn, she makes a sign and a door from the ship opens. We get the first glimpse of a shimmered Noxian. Here, I think it's cool that Caitlyn detaches the scope of a rifle to use it, very practical. We get a better look at the big guy here. Before anyone says it, no, this has no connection to Cyan or Mundu, this is just a Noxian empowered by Shimmer. Cyan is alive because of blood magic, and Mundu's origin is still vague, but personally I think the idea was for him to be tied to Renata, as both her and Mundu's rework came out around the same time, and Renata doesn't use Shimmer, at least not yet. That might change after Riot updates her. We can also see what the purpose of this guy is only pulling Viktor's cocoon. But as we'll find out later, Viktor is not inside it, which explains why it isn't floating like we saw before. We then cut to Jayce as he pulls out the cylinders from the gates, the same ones from Season 1, and the same ones Salo was stealing in the previous act. The enforcers are still trying to fight off the Noxians, including Vi, who we see here using the thrusters on their gauntlets, to no avail as the Shimmer Noxians barge in anyway, and Loris, who was trying to shoot at the cocoon, but unfortunately dies before doing so. And the piano kid notices this. We cut to Caitlyn with a small squad which includes her, Maddie, the father we saw before, and a 4th member. On the other side we see Stab and some background characters. We cut back to Vi doing some of her signature moves. on the Noxians, like this diving punch. A Noxian overpowers her and she notices that Loris is dead. Caitlyn's squad goes in with the Grey to plant a bomb on the cocoon. We see the father dying. The squad goes in as the Noxians choke on the Grey, and we get a nice action scene of Caitlyn taking them down. I really like these frames when she fires her weapon. The guy carrying the bomb dies, but Stab is there to finish the job. We get a couple more cool frames, and we can see Caitlyn shooting the Noxians in the head, which makes sense but could also be a nod to her passive in League. Stab plants the bomb, but if you notice there's something here, and after the enforcers brace themselves for an explosion, we can see what that is. It's a nail. This causes the bomb to not go off, and if I had to guess, this was Maddie's doing, because a second later, Caitlyn gets hit from behind by an enforcer who we know is Maddie. Seconds later, we see the Grey dispersing and Maddie locking down Caitlyn with her rifle. As Ambessa approaches, Maddie takes off her mask, revealing her betrayal. I wonder when Maddie started working with Ambessa. Was it before Ambessa got Caitlyn a promotion, or was it after that? Because depending on the answer, that shot of Maddie happily joining the Noxians beating on their chests might have not been her being naive, maybe it was all part of Ambessa's plan to convince Caitlyn. Ambessa takes the rifle and begins dismantling it, as she says that she warned Caitlyn about professional entanglements, a reference to her line from the previous act, which came after the scene of Caitlyn and Maddie in bed. Behind them we can see the X gates, and I want to point out that it's cool that these seem to operate like an airport. We can see here that this is the C2 gate and the word customs. In hindsight, this makes perfect sense, but I never really thought about it before this shot. We can see Maddie getting ready to shoot Caitlyn, but Ambessa taught her too well and she managed to dodge the first shot and hit Caitlyn with her own rifle. However, Ambessa is too fast and before Caitlyn shoots at her, she gets stabbed. We get the line, "Desperation is the doorway to oblivion," which is also one of her lines in League. Ambessa leaves the knife on Caitlyn, a mistake as we'll see. Maddie readies herself and says, "I did appreciate your warmth." I wonder if she's being sarcastic here, as on every scene with Caitlyn, Caitlyn was always dismissing Maddie's comfort, though that's what we saw. They were indeed together for some time, so there was probably more than that. As she shoots, the flash reveals what I believe is a smile on her face, so she was probably enjoying this. Thankfully for Caitlyn, Mel shows up just in time to put a barrier around Maddie that causes the bullet to ricochet off of it and hit her in the forehead. Maddie's corpse then falls onto Caitlyn, almost like she's looking for her warmth even in death. Mel reveals herself and we can immediately see that change in Ambessa's face. Mel is her greatest weakness, after all. Mel asks for Ambessa to stop the bloodshed and spare the lives of the people of the cities, which to Ambessa is nothing but confirmation that Mel has not changed. Remember, mercy is what she asked for during her flashback. To Ambessa, Mel is still that child, as she says, still a fox. But then music starts blasting from the skies as Jinx's hideout approaches. Here we see Violet's rabbit, the one she gave to Powder in Season 1. Then we see Jinx's new look, and this is a Jinxed who is tapping into her full potential, choosing who she wants to be. And we can see that in the way that she dresses and portrays herself. Bright colors, paint everywhere, a hoodie with teeth, and dyed hair. Behind her, we see the Milo and Clagger dolls. That plus the rabbit were all tied to her past and her traumas, and now they are being displayed for the world to see. She is no longer letting her past control her. Her hideout, which was a safe space, the place where she almost killed herself and was basically underground, now it's flying high in the sky and blasting music. We see her shooting colorful explosions at the Noxians. We can also see that her hideout is painted with sparks, bunny ears, like her minigun in League. We'll later see that it also has hourglasses all over, showing her allegiance with Echo and the Firelights. We can also see X's painted on it. X's are obviously associated with Jinx ever since she was first teased as a new League champion. Then we get this cool shot of Jinx featuring the usual scribbles, which we've come to associate with her trauma, but now here are amplifying her coolness and her power. Caitlyn just saw Mel using magic and now is seeing this huge Jinx-themed balloon flying by. She is probably very confused. Ambessa doesn't hesitate, however, and gives orders immediately. Here we can see the hourglass graffitis that I mentioned, but also some clouds like the ones in Jinx's tattoos. Then from above Jinx comes the boy savior, now with a red scarf like the one we see in League. I love this shot of him and the firelights falling between the fans of the hideout. Here we get a better look at his new outfit, the red scarf, the Z-drive behind him, the pipe club from the previous season, and his all mask as a knee pad. He's also filled with Jinx's paint, including a couple X's. The firelights casually dodge a couple of Noxian arrows, and then coming out of the smoke from the explosions, we see a couple familiar faces, including Savika, whose arm has been fixed, some of Silco's old goons, Jericho, this new fish guy, I don't remember seeing him before, more of Silco's goons, including the bartender from Season 1. Echo and Scar take the big guy down with like 2 hits, which is Convenient, I guess. The hideout then approaches Vi, who is still fighting Noxians. We get the reveal of Jinx's new weapon, as we learned from her minigame in League. This new weapon is called Rhino, and it combines both Pow Pow and Fishbones. Again, this new Jinx is fully embracing all of her colors, and her minigame shots are multicolored. Echo then approaches the hideout. The camera is attached to his club, almost like a selfie stick. We saw something similar in episode 7 with Jayce. Here we can notice that his clock is attached to his hand, which is probably a callback to his design in League. That version actually uses the clock to go back, not just a cord, while in this version the clock is used to determine how far back he goes. Here we get a close-up of his face and we can see that he has his ears pierced. I believe the only time we've seen Echo with earrings was in the other timeline in episode 7, where he himself was checking the earrings in his reflection. Echo and Jinx help out against the Noxians. The piano kid sees Laurie's corpse on the machine and prepares to take his place. Everyone's fighting the Noxians. We see Ambessa using her soldiers as shields. They are expendable after all. We see Mel protecting people and fighting using her magic. Piano guy gets ready to shoot the container. A shimmered Noxian shows up, but Vi makes quick work of him, and then boom, they hit the cocoon. Fight's over, except Viktor was not there. He never was. This was all a distraction, all part of Ambessa's plan. Everyone realizes this, and as Mel asks, "Where's Viktor?" we transition to inside the X-Gates. Here, Viktor cuts the door in the shape of an arrow pointing upward. Remember that? Later he and Viktor will fly toward the top of the gates. Slowly we get to see Viktor's new look, and I love this shot of him breaking the glass on the floor. Then we see that he now has this magical halo around his head, and his staff is more intricate as well. His overall design resembling even more a divine figure. The automatons show up, including Vander. We get a jump scare of one of them attacking Stab. As he does, Stab's eyes change color and he stops moving. As we'll see, this will happen to everyone who gets touched by the automatons. At this point, Viktor is still working with Ambessa. Her soldiers form an arena in front of the gates, blocking Mel from leaving. Caitlyn slowly approaches Ambessa from behind. Mel and Ambessa prepare to fight each other. Mel tells her that she's no Medarda, and Ambessa scoffs off, and just as she's about to reply, Caitlyn punches her in the face and says shut up and fight, probably top 3 coolest moments from Caitlyn in Arcane. Then Caitlyn passes her a weapon, very honorable of her. She grabs one herself too, mimicking her training. Mel too readies herself and protects Caitlyn against the weapon Ambessa threw at her, which hits a soldier instead. Ambessa puts her mask on and we can see the runes light up on her arm. Mel blasts her white robe off. As I said, white likely represents Mel's ties to Piltover, but here it also represents her side as a pacifist. Mel believed conflicts could and should be solved by negotiation, but now the fox is embracing the wolf and engaging in a fight with her own mother, the biggest wolf in her life. Meanwhile, the automatons move towards the top of the X-Gates, including Vander, and we get this shot reminiscent of the one in the caves, when Vi decided to stop fighting him. Jinx shoots him down and he jumps toward her hideout. Echo gives Vi a sign and she jumps, and we get this cool shot of the automatons trying to reach her. Echo kick flips the board and it expands, giving room for Vi. They fly off toward Jinx, who's dealing with Vander. Vi uses her thrusters to knock Vander off Jinx. Meanwhile, Mel uses her magic against her mother. To no avail, the stones absorb it. Caitlyn goes in, but Ambessa makes quick work of her, even with Mel's blasts. The two together are no match for Ambessa's skill and to her stones. She's not even wielding a weapon here. Vander chokes Vi, and we can see that he works exactly like the automatons. The hideout then approaches the clock from the gate. Clock obviously alluding to Echo's powers. Here we can also see these two hands. Echo will later use one of them as a bat. To stop Vander, Echo crashes the hideout into the clock. This was something we saw in episode 7 in the timeline Jayce visited. We return to Viktor, who says that he is doing all of this to stop cruelty and injustice, to which Jayce replies that people deserve to choose their own fates. This is probably the main theme of season 2, not being confined by what others, peers, society think or want you to be, and instead forge your own path. Make your own choices. We see that in this act, especially with Jinx and Mel. However, Viktor disagrees with free will, saying it only leads to division. His goal is for everyone to share the same mind, putting an end to everyone's suffering. He sends the cylinders back into the gate, reactivating it. Meanwhile, Ambessa is still dealing with Mel and Caitlyn, still winning. We get this shot of her walking, which is reminiscent of the ones we've gotten for Jinx in the past. Ambessa tries to finish Caitlyn. Mel protects her. Here, Ambessa is aiming for Caitlyn's eye. Caitlyn notices Mel's magic about to be absorbed by the stones, so she takes a knife out of her torso and cuts them out of Ambessa's arms. But Ambessa does manage to hit her in the eye, as we'll see. Ambessa takes a couple seconds to notice, but as she does, the black rose necklace reveals itself on Mel's neck. As Ambessa looks at her daughter, Mel says a wolf has no mercy, the same thing she said when she killed the woman that wore that same necklace. I don't think I've said this before, but maybe that woman was also a member of the rose, who knows? Either way, the dark red magic from the rose emerges out of the necklace, and the same rose pattern that swallowed Mel now does the same to Ambessa. Inside this realm, the lady who's likely LeBlanc stares at Ambessa. She begins using her magic on her. I'm not sure if she's just killing her or doing something more here, maybe reading her mind, but then, to LeBlanc's surprise, Mel shows up. LeBlanc uses her chains on Mel, but she has overpowered them before and so she does it again. Mel says she sees LeBlanc's face, again referencing Mel's powers which allow her to see through the deceptions of LeBlanc. With a magical burst, she breaks the chains and frees herself and Ambessa. In this shot in the background, we get a better look at the window above the door, and we can see the crests of multiple regions. Their positions here are somewhat aligned with their locations on the map. We see Freljord, then Noxus, then Ionia, and then we have Bilgewater, Ixtal and Shurima, which don't really line up that much, but if you kept going clockwise, then those would be in order. With this being said, I think, or at least I hope, this is just an easter egg, because otherwise, what the hell is the hidden magical city of Ixtal doing here? Moving on, Ambessa falls onto Mel, her last words being "you are the wolf." Remember, Ambessa always saw Mel as the fox, but as she told her when she was younger, she had to be both the fox and the wolf. And so she did. She defeated her mother as the wolf, using everything at her disposal to overpower her, but she was also the fox when she lied and used the Black Rose to overpower her mother before betraying them. And with Ambessa's death, we get what I believe is the only death in the show. I've mentioned Heimerdinger, and I'll mention the rest when we get there. I predicted in the past that Ambessa was going to die, primarily because her role in the story was always to be part of Mel's arc, and I thought her death made sense to finish that arc. But also because if you are going to kill a champion from League, it might as well be one that hasn't been in the game for like a decade. There are not as many people attached to the character yet. Ambessa's death pushes Mel into the position of leader of House Medarda, which makes sense for her character. She lived her whole life trying to live up to the ideals of her family, and now those ideals will be dictated by her. Ambessa's death and Mel taking her role was likely hinted at in the intro of Season 2. The Noxian soldiers signal that the battle is over, then we go inside the clock from the gates as Vi wakes up from the crash. She runs toward Jinx and passes by Echo while he's unconscious. We then get this line from Jinx, where she tells Vi she's always with her even when they are worlds apart. This might be a hint towards Jinx leaving Piltover at the end of the show, but we'll get to that later. Then we get this back-to-back shot of them, similar to the one from Season 1. We go back to Viktor and Jayce, where we can see how much taller Viktor is now. Viktor is able to shape the gates into that white void we saw and reveal the anomaly. After a couple cool shots of the anomaly, we return and see it on Viktor's hand. He places it on his cane and flies toward the top, taking Jayce with him. Again, Viktor wants Jayce to be part of this. So much for unity and becoming one, yet he wants to be with Jayce. As they fly to the top, Jayce uses his hammer to catch up. Slightly above them, Vander spots the sisters. He moves so fast it's almost like he's teleporting. We get this slow motion effect so we can keep up, and notice how Jinx is much more ready than Vi. Thanks to Shimmer, she's able to keep up and react to Vander's speed. But as Viktor approaches them, everything starts floating. Again, this is one of the first things we saw X-Tech doing. And just like before, we get these underwater effects. We get this shot of Jinx pulling her minigun's trigger, which is almost exactly the one from the other timeline, but mirrored. She then uses her minigun to run away from Vander, meanwhile Vi uses her thrusters to get to them. Jinx then shoots a rocket at him. Again, her new weapon combines both minigun and rocket launcher into one. Vander simply redirects the rocket. Jayce and Viktor are still going up. Jayce tries to hit Viktor with his hammer, but Viktor uses his arm to stop him. Good opportunity for me to say that I don't know why Viktor has a third arm in this new design. In the show, it comes out of nowhere and is basically only going to be used here. Machine Herald Viktor had a third arm for practical reasons, to help him. This one, however, seems to only have a third arm because the old one also had it. Viktor grabs Jayce by the neck, and we return to Jinx as she hits Vander with another rocket. Vander grabs Jinx, Vi punches him, then Viktor and Jayce fly past them. Here I wanna point out that not a single time has Viktor touched Jayce and read his memories yet. This might be because of how Jayce was touched by the Arcane or whatever, because as we'll see later, Echo also seems to have some immunity to Viktor's powers. Viktor readies his laser, but obviously not to kill Jayce, that's not what he wants. He only uses it to clear a path to the top. As they reach it, we can see it looking exactly like it does in the other timeline. We get this very divine shot of Viktor. As he says the word chaos, a storm forms around the anomaly, a reference to his ultimate in League. We get a couple frames of the other timeline, or do we? You see, these frames are likely just the future of this timeline, and as I've said in the past, the other timeline that we saw is that future. So yeah, technically both answers are right. A magical wave bursts from the anomaly, leaving its pattern all over. Then Viktor's magical tethers fly from it toward everyone, basically connecting them to the hive mind. Savika, the Noxians, Mel, Caitlyn, Stab, everyone. 3 of them go inside the X gates toward Vi, Jinx and Echo. As Vi looks at them, Vander grabs her, then Jinx is able to dodge one, but because of that, Vander also grabs her, then both of them get connected as well. We then see Echo waking up. We get this shot of the clock hands I mentioned before. In a couple moments we'll see him wielding one of them, like a bat, just like he does in League. In case you didn't know, his weapon in the game is also a clock hand. Then Jayce strikes this pose, the same exact one we saw on the other timeline. He's even in the same exact spot, and I think he's realizing that here as Viktor appears behind him. This could very well be the end, but he knows it and so he readies himself. Viktor finally places his hand on Jayce's head, connecting the two of them. Jayce wakes up in Viktor's astral plane and he looks really goofy here. Around him we see Piltover all blurry in the background and everyone else that Viktor has gotten a hold of. Then we get these beautiful shots of Viktor, gigantic in this astral plane. Fortiche really outdone themselves here. Emotion clashes with reason. Viktor says here, this is what he believes right now. You've always wanted to cure what you thought were weaknesses. Your leg, your disease, but you were never broken, Viktor. There's beauty in imperfections. They made you who you are, an inseparable piece of everything I admire about you. As I said before, Viktor's initial intentions were good, but he became obsessed with what he saw as weaknesses. These were holding him back from his potential, not allowing him to have the legacy he wanted. Then a green blur flashes behind him. Echo, who somehow managed to wake up and ran from Viktor's tether off screen. As I said, he now wields the hand as a bat and he looks very similar to what it does in League. And after he fails to hit Viktor, we are going to see a cool montage of him rewinding and trying again and again until the automatons finally manage to stop him. Even when he rewinds now, it doesn't matter because he isn't going further back enough. As he begins to connect to the hive, he manages to not succumb to it long enough for him to increase the time he can go back on the Z drive. We can see here the mark he left earlier to note that he can't go further than 4 seconds. He increases it way past that and pulls the cord. He goes back, but it seems that the automatons are being pushed away instead of going back with him. Everything else seems to go back though as Jayce rewinds as well. There's no issues there, so I'm not sure what was happening with Heimerdinger and why he was exploding. Perhaps Yordles who've traveled between timelines react differently to stuff like this, I'm not sure. Either way, Echo goes back to before the first automaton hit him. We can see it here still confused as to how Echo managed to dodge it. This time Echo grabs the Z drive and throws it at Viktor. We can see the anomaly inside as it gets closer to his face. Inside his plane the anomaly looks huge, which I guess confirms that how it looks in the normal world doesn't matter. Echo said it was really small, but the other anomaly also became small when Viktor grabbed it. Then a small explosion happens. I'm not sure why, but I'm guessing it's because the anomaly is no longer contained within the Z drive. It's now free. We can see the pieces of the Z drive flying away. Time seems to have stopped as we see Echo frozen. We get this beautiful shot of Viktor's mask breaking, in this case literally, but soon metaphorically as well, as Jayce will convince Viktor to stop all of this. In the astral plane, the hole in the mask reveals the real Viktor underneath. Here he is either feeling the injury or is trying to hide his real face, and the connection to the people ceases. I thought I wanted us to give magic to the world, now I just want my partner back. This is what Jayce tells Viktor, and he asks, why do you persist after everything I've done? Which is a line that a lot of characters could say. Vi to Jinx, Jinx to Vi, Caitlyn to Vi, Vi to Caitlyn, Ambessa to Mel, Jinx to Echo, etc. Because I promised you is Jayce's answer as he hugs Viktor, and for some reason only now is Viktor going to take a look inside Jayce's mind and see the horrors he saw. We flash back to Jayce asking the mage why he gave him the stone. This time we see more of what happened. as the mage reveals himself to be Viktor. I thought I could bring an end to the world's suffering, but when every equation was solved, all that remained were fields of dreamless solitude. There is no prize to perfection, only an end to pursuit. In all timelines, in all possibilities, only you can show me this. As Viktor says, I thought that could bring an end to the world's suffering. We get a shot of the mage giving Jayce a stone that looks like the one we know, which is then followed by this shot of Jayce from this world. Then, as Viktor talks about other timelines, we see multiple different stones instead, ending with the one we know, which leads to the events we saw and to our Jayce. And now buckle in because I wanna talk about this. I think I understand what happened here, but I'm gonna go through my thought process to understand this because it took a while. My first reaction was, okay, this means that the mage who gave Jayce the stone was Viktor, and this is supported by the fact that all Viktor's staff looks similar to the one from the mage, which led me to assume that Viktor has been going back in time, giving Jayce different stones to try to stop himself from destroying the city, and that this universe they are in is just one of those timelines where they failed. Then I thought maybe the reason they managed to stop him in the main timeline was because this one had Echo, who built the Z drive, using the rune we saw in this timeline stone. But then I realized that in this destroyed universe, we see Jinx's hideout crashed onto the gates, which means that in this timeline, Echo was also able to use it to prevent Jinx from killing herself, so things weren't adding up. For starters, if Viktor didn't want any of this to happen, he wouldn't have given Jayce the stone. But maybe Viktor didn't want to stop any of this, maybe he just didn't want to end up alone, or he still wanted Hextech to be a thing, whatever. Secondly, if giving Jayce the stone is what leads this to happen, and this happening is what leads Viktor to give Jayce the stone, then we have here a time loop. But you may say, hey, maybe before this loop there was a timeline that also led to a similar fate, despite Jayce never receiving the stone. Sure, whatever. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but sure. And that's when it hit me. Literally, as I was writing this, I finally got it. There's no loop. There are alternate timelines, sure, but no loop. The mage from Jayce's childhood and old Viktor are not the same person, and here's why. This destroyed timeline has the Jinx hideout on the gates, and Jayce in this exact pose, because this is not exactly an alternate timeline. I think that instead of old Viktor pulling Jayce to a parallel timeline, this old Viktor pulled Jayce from the past. I think this Viktor is the future of our Viktor, which makes his dialogue make sense. This is a Viktor that won, but after doing so, saw nothing but solitude. So he pulled Jayce from the past to this moment to show him how to defeat his past self, which was basically just show that past self the consequences of his actions. And you might be wondering, what about the line about the other timelines? What about the different stones? I think that might just be timelines Viktor visited or looked into when looking for a way to stop what he did. I'm not 100% sure, but this is the best I could come up with for now. Like, if he can teleport someone through time, he can probably also do this, right? Yeah, the framing was done in a way that made everyone think that some time traveling was involved, but I don't think it's the case. And you might ask, then why does Jayce talk to old Viktor like he's the mage from his childhood? Good question. Maybe because he doesn't know that Viktor isn't the mage. I mean, he had only seen the robes and the cane, so maybe he just assumed that they're the same person, at least until Viktor revealed himself. Yes, I know that there are parallel shots between the mage and Viktor, but I believe those were there to make us, the viewers, believe these were the same person before the big reveal at the end. Another question we might ask is, why doesn't Viktor look transformed here? I assume he's just able to change his own appearance at will, though I'm not really 100% sure. But if this is a Viktor that no longer believes in the glorious evolution, it makes sense for him to revert to his more human self. Either way, the anomaly patterns are still present in his face, but also on his robes. However, there are no patterns present in the mage. Let's go back to Viktor's line one more time. As Viktor says, I thought that could bring an end to the world's suffering, we get a shot of the mage giving Jayce a stone that looks like the one we know, and then this shot of Jayce from this world. Here, he's talking about the fate he experienced. The stone is the same from our Jayce, because this is where our main universe was headed toward. Then, as Viktor talks about other timelines, we see multiple different stones instead, ending with the one we know, which leads to the events we saw and to our Jayce. A Jayce that has yet to experience this fate. A Jayce pulled to the future of his own world, so he can then return to his own time and prevent it. I think this is what makes the most sense. Downside, the mage might actually be Rise, and if that's the case, Why isn't he blue? Alright, so going back to the final episode, Viktor experiences these memories from Jayce, making him realize his mistake. We see his body, his mask, this facade he built for himself, this prison, as Silco said, break apart. Overwhelmed, he turns back into his more human form. He looks around, seeing everything he has done. He tells Jayce to leave, but Jayce places a hand on his shoulder, something he does a lot in Arcane. He then looks at the stone in his wrist and takes it out. He then gives it to Viktor, just like the mage gave it to him. We finish this together. We see the rune powering Viktor, then bursting out. I was expecting that there was something special about this rune, but I don't really know if that's the case anymore. If I missed something, please do let me know. Maybe I was right and this is the rune that helps Echo build the Z drive, but I'm not 100% sure on that. The souls, spirits from the automatons, leave their bodies and fly toward the X gates. Here they don't seem to be frozen in time, so maybe that only happened near the Z drive? I'm not sure. Then, in the astral plane, they enter through the rune. Perhaps this here represents the souls being able to pass on to the afterlife, finally freed from Viktor, or maybe they are just being used to power whatever the duo is doing here. Sorry, I'm a straight guy, so I have no idea what they're doing. Also, this is all happening while they are frozen in time up there. We see the power almost overwhelming them, but together they push through it. We see these beautiful shots of them. As their foreheads meet, their bodies form an arrow pointing downwards. I don't know if this was intentional, but this reminded me of the arrow pointing upward that we saw below the gates. Jayce's stone in the real world shines and both him and Viktor get swallowed by it, leaving no trace of them behind. This causes time to go forward again and the automatons to turn off. Or maybe time never froze, maybe all of this happened really fast? Probably not, because we saw the gold spirits travel toward the gates. Either way, I don't think Jayce and Viktor died here. They just left to either that astral plane or somewhere between time and space. I don't think we'll ever see them again, though I could be wrong. We see a final explosion and the tethers from Viktor dissipating. Everyone goes back to their senses, including Vander and the sisters. The automatons start falling from the sky. We see Caitlyn still breathing, but bleeding out of her eye. And now we'll see a final fight with the sisters against Vander. Good moment to say how dumb it was that Vander never became the wolf that we know. What's even the point of him being Warwick, right? He could have just been his own thing. I understand that they still wanted him to look and feel like Vander, that made sense for Act 2, but after that I was expecting him to turn full beast in Act 3. But now, looking at the story of Act 3, there's not really a good point for that to happen. So instead we are left with his version of Vander, so different that his arcane skin in League couldn't even look like it. Here Vi and Vander are about to fall down. Jinx tells her to jump to the other side to save herself, but as Vi looks at Vander, she breaks down. She touches his face, we can see the fluid from the automatons looking almost like tears in his eyes. We see a flashback from that night where they thought he died, but then he wakes up. Vander no longer himself, no longer under Viktor's control, now just a monster Singed created. And if you're wondering why he's still moving despite all of the other automatons being offline, I'm not 100% sure. If I had to guess, it's because of the shimmer in his blood. It just makes it so that he can't really die. It still doesn't make that much sense considering that Viktor seemed to be pulling the souls out of the automatons, but hell, I don't really know at this point. Anyways, Jinx tackles Vander, but Vi grabs her before she falls. A lot of these shots are callbacks to their heist in Act 1 of Season 1. Is Warwick really light or is Jinx just really strong? Who knows? Jinx looks at Vi, once again says that she's always with her. She then snatches the gem from Vi's gauntlet, causing it to turn off and both Jinx and Vander to fall. This must be devastating for Vi. She spent a decade in prison after that night, then comes back, gets reunited with her sister, then separated from her, then kidnapped by her, then she runs away, then they fight, then she runs away again, then she comes back and things are good again, then she runs away once again, and now she's back and everything is almost fine again, and she does this. Vi truly cannot catch a break. But Jinx smiles. They're both on good terms again, and she's living her sister's life, allowing her to finally be happy. She cries and turns to Vander, touching his face. The song from when she burned down the last drop starts playing again. We see this flashback of Vander putting the girls to sleep. We can see that this takes place after the war on the bridge, when Vander took them, but before the heist, as they look younger here, and Vi still has her bunny. Vi cries too. She can't even look at it. Jinx pulls out her monkey grenade, the same one she almost killed herself with while this song was playing the last time. On the flashback we see a similar monkey head, then we see an explosion colored pink and blue, Vi and Jinx's colors, but before it, we see this small pink blur flashing out of it. As we've seen before, these pink blurs only ever appear coming out of Jinx's eyes, so it's more than likely that she managed to escape here. Either way, this is purposely left ambiguous. Even if Jinx survives, she wants everyone to think she died so that they can finally be happy. Then we see Jayce's hammer still on top of the gates, which is weird because before it seemed like it was consumed, or at least that Jayce let go of it, so the fact that it's still standing is surprising. We then see the aftermath of the battle. We get this shot of the bridge, which we've seen before. We see people gathering, leaving pieces of paper on this bowl. These will later be lit and fly, paying respects to the dead. We see Piltovans, Zonites, Jinxes, Jayce's mom, the family from before. Then we see Savika and Shula. Savika representing the Undercity and Shula being the last remaining member of the council. We see Scar and the piano guy. The papers burning and flying to the sky. Echo alone in the same spot Vi took Powder in Season 1, the same spot he kissed the other Powder in Episode 7. He too lights up a paper, likely for Jinx. We then see the new council members, all of them being characters we've seen in the background this season, and then Savika joins them, which is a pretty cool moment to finally see Piltover embrace Zon like this, though I really wish this season had focused more on the problems between both cities instead of this arcane cataclysm. Then we see Oriana and Singed being the only guy who just won, like he's the only one who actually gets a happy ending. Maybe besides Echo and Savika, but even they lost Jinx. Then we get a familiar shot of the X gates and a familiar crow flying by. The crow takes a look inside Jayce's hammer before revealing more eyes, confirming that these are indeed Swain or Rom's ravens, which means that Swain already made a deal with the demon, though we don't know if this is before or after he seized control of Noxus. Either way, the bird likely finds Jayce's X-Tech gem from the other timeline. This is a clear setup for the next season, which will likely focus on Noxus, but hopefully it won't have more of these arcane shenanigans. But speaking of Noxus, now Mel is the head of House Medarda. Not only that, but she also made herself an enemy of the Black Rose. Who knows if we are not looking at the face of the Faceless, the leader of Noxus who represents Guile. Crazy theory? Maybe, but who knows. Here we see Mel not only dressed in black and red, Noxian colors, but also having makeup with the same colors, just like her mother. She also seems to be ready to put on her mother's mask, accepting her legacy and responsibility. We then see the Raven follow the Medarda ships as they leave Piltover. And then we get this line from Caitlyn saying their story isn't over. And we transition to her now having an eye patch, looking through the Queerman files. We see the schematic of the X gates, designed by Jayce Tallis, no mention of Viktor. We see that Caitlyn is holding the monkey head from Jinx's grenade. That's because she's looking if there was any way Jinx could have survived, because I assume that despite finding this piece, they did not find her body. You might be wondering, what about Warwick? Good question, I do not have an answer for that. She then zooms in on these vents, alluding to the idea that Jinx might have used them to escape. In the same room, we then see Vi. She's humming the song Powder sang at the bridge. In a second she'll say she learned it from her mother. Here she's also holding the cups from the last drop. Then Caitlyn asks Vi if she's still in this fight, to which Vi replies, "I am the dirt under your nails, Cupcake, nothing's gonna clean me out." The name of the episode coming from this line. I'm not sure what Caitlyn means by this fight, but Vi's response is obviously her saying that she'll never leave Caitlyn. Whenever she goes, she'll follow. Then we get this shot of a ship leaving the city, almost one-to-one to one of the first shots of the show after the war at the bridge, the ship and camera movements being identical. One day I'm going to ride on one of those things, is what Powder says in that scene. It's actually her first line in the show, if we don't count her singing at the bridge, and if we don't count her saying whoa a couple seconds before this line. This led many to believe that Jinx survived and now she's riding this specific ship, and to be honest, I agree. I think Jinx is alive. I think that's exactly why we saw the pink flash at the gates, why we saw Caitlyn looking at the schematic of the gates, and why we see this ship here and now. Will we ever see Jinx again? I don't know, because for now this is the end. Let me just say, I think the ending is good. It's sad, yes, but it feels like a nice send-off to most of the characters. After watching it for the first time, I was satisfied. I was contemplating the idea for the first time that maybe League champions don't need to be like comic book heroes, where their stories go on indefinitely. And I still believe in that. but the more I thought about this season and rewatched it and digested it, the more I feel like there was so much missed potential. Before that, let me talk about what this means for the League champions and for League's lore. Personally, I think it's sad that all the praise and valid criticism of the show is being drowned by comments of people asking how and why this is canon. The show was never really meant to be canon. It was mostly developed in isolation from everything else Riot is doing, aka the Riot higher-ups never really believed in it and or they never really cared about the lore and its cohesion. But Arcane was a massive success, probably Riot's biggest success after League itself, and so Arcane is now canon, despite all the inconsistencies. Again, it saddens me that at least 30% of the discourse about the show is about it being canon, because had it stayed as an alternate universe, MCU style, all of this could have been avoided. And in case it wasn't obvious, I think that discourse is more than valid. At the moment, most if not all of the Piltover and Zon characters that don't appear in the show are not canon. Maybe not you, Ezreal, you might be fine. Sure, they still exist out there, and champions and skins might hint at what their new stories might be, but until we actually get those stories, the characters might as well not exist. I don't think X-Tech is gone, but it's definitely going to be hard to write anything with it that doesn't undermine everything that happens in the show. Though, if I have to be honest, X-Tech being used in a small scale, like for tools and weapons, seems to not have as bad of an effect as the X-Gates had. X-Tech was a clear metaphor for how we, in the real world, also harness resources for more planet without caring about the consequences that might affect us and every being that lives here. But, just like in the real world, there might be people in Piltover who know about the consequences but simply don't care and will still use and abuse X-Tech anyways. That's an interesting direction to take, though I doubt Riot would have the balls to do it. They will probably come up with a safer version of X-Tech or just say that in small quantities it's chill to use it, which I think undermines a bit the plot of Arcane. As for the timeline, Rise, Swain, the Rune Wars, I'm going to wait and see what they do, and the same goes for making magic more rare in Runeterra. That seems to be the direction they are taking, but I'm going to wait for a more definitive answer. Moving on to the champions in the show, I know a lot of people are disappointed, but I don't agree with all the reasons. Christian Ling said that their goal was to tell the definitive version of the stories of the characters, and I get that. On one hand, the characters we know in League are very static. Not all of them, but most of them don't ever grow or change, and that's mostly because League's lore never moves forward. And it's good that now it is, kinda. The problem is that it's moving forward without ever passing through the beats and stories that we've known for so long. For example, Caitlyn in Arcane is a much more fleshed out character than she ever was. She learns, she evolves, she suffers, she changes, but never passes through the point of being the Caitlyn that we know. She never becomes the Piltovan sheriff that solves cases with her partner Vi. They never become Piltover's finest. And sure, that might happen post Arcane, but what I'm saying is that there were expectations for these characters that weren't met, and I think that that's one of the hardest things for people to accept. Yes, it's the fact that these characters didn't end up the same or close to the ones that we know, but it's also that they never even passed through them. Like sure, about 60% of the Vi that we knew was just a glorified police brutality joke, and this new version is much better. But obviously people who dig the old one are going to be disappointed when we never see her really becoming an enforcer. And again, these are all choices that make sense for the story Arcane was trying to tell. I'm just saying that people had expectations for these characters that never came to fruition. And probably never will. Some are just incohesive with the story Arcane told, and some won't ever get to happen because we're probably not going to see much of these characters ever again. Like, think about it. Where we get our lore from nowadays. Lore expansions are pretty bare bones, new champions are pretty disconnected from anything else. That might change with this new season's approach, but we'll see. Cinematics we get one every year and they are barely a good vehicle for storytelling. And finally we have shows, which is just Arcane for now, which just finished its story with Piltover and Zon. Sure, we're getting a novel for Ambessa, but that's a very rare exception. Unless one of the League seasons is themed after Piltover and Zon, we're probably never going to see anything for these characters anytime soon. Which again, Arcane told the story it wanted to tell, and that's fine. The story of these characters is pretty much over. Except for one or two. I'm just saying that they never became the champions some people were expecting them to become, and they probably never will now. And that's hard to people to accept when we've had them for 10 plus years. I'm really sad we're losing old Echo. Sure, I love the one we have in Arcane, but that one had to share screen time with 10 plus other characters. He had his moments, but there was a limitation of how much we could get out of him. And now I don't even know if this one is going to build a new Z-Drive or not. That sucks. And don't get me started on Warwick and Viktor. I already said that I'm not sure what the point of Vander being Warwick was, when he could have become a monster anyway, without being Warwick himself, but Viktor is like a brand new character, so much so that they changed his title from Machine Herald to Herald of the Arcane. Sure, there are still overlaps, but I felt like Cyborg was part of his thematic fantasy. And to be honest, this change wouldn't even be as bad if it had a good reason. But if I have to be really honest here, I think the Arcane part of the show, the reason for its name, was the worst part. Looking back at Season 1 and how it explored both cities and the oppression of Piltover over the Undercity, the systematic issues, and how every bad thing that happens in that season basically happened because of them, from the war at the bridge, the heist, Jayce keeping crystals in secret, etc. This duality, the prejudice of Piltover, the ingenuity of Zon, despite the circumstances, and the characters caught up in it, this was the core of the first season. And then the second said, fuck it, this is about Viktor evolving and that's it. From episode 1 forward, we get less and less of this conflict between the cities and more of Viktor becoming a god and Ambessa wanting to take control. And hey, I get it, the writers wanted a third threat, something that could unite both cities, giving them a purpose to fight together. That's not a bad idea, except that whole part I just described happens in like 3 minutes during a Jayce speech. The speech that was mostly about how Viktor and the Noxians are going to fuck everything up. Zon was literally still barricaded as he was saying this. The writers clearly wanted a huge moment and a climatic battle of epic proportions, but what does that add to Vi's story? To Caitlyn's story, to Jinx's story, etc. We could have easily had a battle without world-ending stakes, just a Noxian seeking to seize control of the gates, and we could have explored the relationship between the two cities while seeing our main characters navigate through all the drama. This is why Viktor's design bothers me so much. Yes, I like the old Viktor, but I also think the new one explores some cool ideas that are still in line with transhumanism, just in a different way. But I feel like his whole arc in this season was just not what the season needed. Personally, I think it's not what I wanted. The writers had their story and they went for it, I can't criticize that. I don't think writers should strive to appeal to fans when writing a story. They should write what they want, explore what they want to explore. With that being said, this was very disappointing for me as a League lore fan and as an Arcane fan. Mel and Ambessa are in my opinion the characters that got the better end of the stick. Their stories were actually cool and interesting, though I think they were also maybe unnecessary in a way. Yes, their stories follow the same themes of the show: family, death, legacy, identity, but at the same time they feel so disconnected from everything else, mainly the Black Rose plot. Sure, I'm a League fan, when I saw the Black Rose parts I was excited, but looking at it from the context of the previous season, I can't help but feel like adding a new party of villains, or at least questionable characters, didn't add much to the overall story. In Season 1, all the stories were interconnected, characters were influencing each other's lives, sometimes without even knowing, and in this season, we don't see much of that. Everyone is doing their own thing, then they meet, then they go and do their own thing again, and then they meet again. So, suffice to say, I'm not that happy with the story of Season 2. However, there were a lot of good and cool moments. Everything from the style, the animation, sound effects, voice acting, music, all was an improvement from the previous season, and I didn't even know that that was possible. Really, in this season we saw Fortiche experiment with so many art styles, from the funeral to Isha's last moments, almost every single scene that features the anomaly, and the last shots of Viktor, and then Viktor and Jayce, absolutely breathtaking. And I would be lying if the show didn't make me feel something. The scenes with Vander and the sisters, his good memories, and then those memories fading away, that made me cry so much. I'm almost crying writing this because I'm thinking about them again, and the alternate timeline where things could have worked out for the better. Man, what could have been? And Heimer's last words to Echo. I'm getting goosebumps just remembering them. I know I said I wish we saw more of the conflict between the two cities instead of the Arcane, but honestly what I wanted was more of the characters, interacting with each other, talking with each other. We needed more of that, with the conflict being their stage. Unfortunately, I think the Arcane became the main focus of the show. It was no longer about Vi and Jinx, or Zon's survival, or Piltover's oppression, or Echo helping the people, or Jayce balancing ambition with security, progress with politics. No, it was about Viktor's journey to transcend humanity. Which is a cool story, it just could have been told another time perhaps, or with a different magnitude, so as to not push the other stories to the side. I particularly liked Caitlyn's arc in the show. I liked how they showed that people with power will make the worst decisions instead of taking time to grieve and mourn. I think that was going in a really cool direction until suddenly there were more important things to focus on, like Viktor's commune, Vander, the Noxians, and then later the Arcane. Caitlyn barely talks after that. In sum, there was so much missed potential here. yet the show is still so deeply compelling. And hey, if that's not League lore in a nutshell, I don't know what is. Thank you so much for watching this far. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, it's free and you can always change your mind later. And with this being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.